Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Bats and happy holidays, everybody. Yeah! All right, have fun, guys. All right, because I was hopeful to get the next museum episode up by now and it's just not going to happen anytime soon, I thought I'd share some bits that I have recorded but decided to work into the story in different ways. Starting with the ending. As with most of the series that I've started, I already have the endings pretty much set, and the episodes are me just working back to that ending by pulling the strings that I didn't pull while reaching that ending. And this museum series is no different, except for the fact that the ending started as the beginning. And so what follows is the first bit that I recorded for this museum series before I decided it made a better ending than a beginning. And then I have something that I worked up recently as a quick bit of fun, but then decided that that stuff would be better served by being folded into an episode proper. And so I'm probably going to pull this video after the new year because I do want to work this stuff in, and I'd rather not have the ending hanging around out there, right? So have fun with this one, guys. All right, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you're watching this video, you probably have some belief that our history as it's presented to us is not representative of the truth, and that history as it's presented to us only represents what our controllers, whomever they may be, wishes us to see. And they use this information as part of a multifaceted plan to keep Gen Pop compliant. The less a controlled population knows about its history before they were controlled, the better. And so with that in mind, our controllers created these indoctrination centers to disseminate the information that they wanted us to know. But sometimes just telling someone something, or having them read it from static typeset pages, isn't enough. And if there's one thing that those behind the indoctrination programs understand, it's that seeing is believing. If you could provide some sort of visual reinforcement to support the written or spoken word, your ideas were much more likely to take hold. And the tableaus of Mrs. Jarley's waxworks are a perfect example of this strategy in action. You visually present a scene, throw a catchy tune on top of it, and the scene would implant itself that much deeper in your subconscious. Just as a tableau alone would further imprint an idea that was read or heard. And so this is where the use of museums comes into play, right? Because they're nothing but visual reinforcement for the things that our controllers wish us to know and understand. The things they teach us in school. And in fact, many of the greatest museums of the Western world are connected to universities. And of course, that museums are attached to schools is no coincidence, right? Again, further reinforcement. But the museums of today are no longer the dark and gloomy concrete halls of old, right? Like everything else, they evolve to keep up with the changing needs of programming a populace by finding new ways to keep the imagination engaged and the concepts they're trying to convey embedded in the subconscious. And so that's what inspired this video, the museum process. We know what museums are, right? They're just glorified showrooms. And we know what they're designed to do, right? They're designed to educate. But rarely do we give any thought to how they do it. So let's lift the curtain a little, like my new friend Charles Wilson Peele here, and take a peek behind the scenes at how museums do what they do. And it looks more like this, really. It's spoiler alert. Hey, and, this journey starts with a quick check-in at the Historical Society of Baltimore County to see when they're open, which is only open on Friday and Saturday, for those curious. And so, of course, while I was here, I took a look around this webpage, and I checked out the Baltimore County Heritage Network, which appears to be just a list of all the museums in Maryland. And so, I was clicking around and clicked on the Maryland Lynching Project. Truth first. Right? The truth is that for Mud City, I have to approach this event as if it were fake in some way, staged or otherwise falsified, right? Because that's the bias of Mud City. Everything in our past is fake. I don't get to choose, right? Everything is everything. And so the truth here is that the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project gave me enough rope to hang the museum trade from the Mud City Paradigm puzzle tree with.
because they let us know that the Lewis Museum in Baltimore.
And just a quick conclusion, the Lewis Museum is looking awfully cabal-like. I did not put that together initially. So anyway, the Lewis Museum
has opened a brand new lynching exhibit, because that's what every racially charged society needs, right? An immersive, interactive, racist murder experience, right? Fun for the whole family, right? And this exhibit was made possible by federal money. It's our tax dollars at work here. And this is thanks to the efforts of Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, who helps the museum secure $650,000 to help build this exhibit. And so now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that this is a waste of public resources, but surely there were better places that this money could have been spent, right? And real quick, Chris Van Hollen was the senator who went to El Salvador on his knees, also at taxpayer expense. And a little FYI on Chrissy here's, he was born in Pakistan to parents who were members of military and government intelligence agencies, right? So there might be more to Chrissy than meets the eye. But this is all just digressing, right? So to get back on track, the Lewis Museum in Baltimore hired the firm Quatrefoil Associates of Columbia, Maryland to design and build the exhibit. And I read that and I was like, wait a minute, what? Quatrefoil? Like the clover pattern symbol found all over church machines and Aethelwulf's ring? Quatrefoils that could be hydrogen wave functions, which could represent gateways between two worlds, or perhaps maybe a gateway between Howard's Woods and Sherwood Forest. Anyway, you mean those Quatrefoils?
Yup.
And they're based out of Columbia, Maryland, you say. Columbia, which was named after the goddess Columbia, who was allegedly created just for America, who's really just our girl Diana dressed up in American cosplay. That Columbia, Maryland? You're telling me these guys are responsible for designing and building museum exhibits whose sole purpose is to brainwash the population? This is just incredible, right? You just cannot make this stuff up. Quatrefoil Associates are the magic makers and the dreamer of dreams. They weave whatever prompts they're given into a tapestry designed to pull the wool over our eyes. And so, to put a cherry on top of what's already a false paradigm speculator's wet dream, they're located on Minstrel Street. They're Pied Pipers. It just doesn't get any more perfect than this for Mud City. Their logo alone is amazing with its quatrefoil and four Vesica Piscis joining at a point or a singularity. A portal all its own. And in geometry, the Vesica Piscis is a type of lens. And in this duality minefield of a reality we call home, a lens is also a filter that improves the image of its focus. Whether it's taking the blur away or bringing objects closer or perhaps filtering certain wavelengths of light to reveal things that are not seen with the naked eye, And that's exactly what Quatrefoil Associates and their Quatrefoil-ific Vesica Pisces are doing with their museum exhibits. Right? They're improving history by making it brighter and easier to see, and by giving you things to touch and to play with, right? Things to interact with. All the better to trick your mind with. And so again, when you're a false paradigm speculator looking to confirm a bias that our history is lies our ancestors told us, and we're being spoon-fed propaganda, it is just hard to get any better than this. And so now, do I think that anyone who works for Quatrefoil Associates today is actively complicit in a conspiracy to fake the past? No, I do not. I think they're just people looking to do a good job, right? But a quick look at their client list, it makes me think that someone, somewhere in the founding of Quatrefoil Associates was hip to the game. I don't know, maybe that's just my apophenia running wild, right? Because this is just too perfect. And so in the wake, I thought it would be fun to take a look at how the gatekeepers at Google and Wiki present the history of museums. And so here we go with that.
All right, so that's how it all began. And I hope you can appreciate why I think that would make a much better ending than it would a beginning. And so what I have next is something that came about as I was rabbit-holing around Charles Willson Peale and his portrait painting career. But after I recorded it, I decided that material would be better served in an episode proper. And so have fun with this one too, guys. All right, so falling under the category of that just happened, right? I'm working on the museum story, and Charles Wilson Peel. And it's a really dense story that needs a lot of work. It's going to be a while before this is ready. Like I said, I have no idea when that episode could drop. And so, in my diligence, I'm looking at Gustavus Hecilius here. And so I'm looking at him because, well, first off, that he's the father of John Hecilius, who was a portrait painter in America and who was a tutor, one of the first art teachers to Charles Wilson Peel. So again, just doing my diligence on these guys. And, so Gustavus here is John's father. And so, his story is kind of interesting. Again, it's one of these people who, without any real history to speak of, and so his father was a priest back in Sweden, and his mother was the sister-in-law of, I love these names, Jesper Swedberg, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Skara, and the aunt of religious leader Emanuel Swedenborg. So we got a Swedberg and a Swedenborg. I mean, I just can't rabbit hole that right now. But anyway, so Gustavus here, he studied art in Sweden and probably in England before he moved to Delaware in 1711. So he's around 29, 30 years old. And he and his brother move over here. He has an elder brother, Andreas Hecilius. And so he kicks around Delaware for about 6 years or so. He moves to Philadelphia, hangs around there for about 4 or 5 years, and then moves to Prince George's County to become a portrait painter. And so that same year, 1721, so he's been in America 10 years. And so he moves to Prince George's County, and he receives the first recorded public art commission in the American colonies. And it's for a version of The Last Supper, which I've downloaded. And this is the first commissioned work of art in America, at least on public record. I'm sure these artist types were selling their portraits privately. Yeah, and I love this. This image is a little grainy. Sorry about that. But this painting is on display. I'm sure we'll see where it is. But I love this, right? Here's the Last Supper up here. But who's chilling out up here and checking out this scene? I don't know. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the life of Brian. Is that Brian hanging out up there? But anyway, so this is an early Gustavus Hecilius commission, allegedly the first commissioned piece of art in America, done by this Swedish guy with a religious background, right? And he's a highly sought after portrait painter, for the next 25 years or so, when he decides to give all that up and become an organ builder, and he hands off all his painting commissions to his son John. And so this is pretty much it. They really don't give us all that much on Gustavus, right? But they do go into the importance of his work for the future of art and especially portraiture. He essentially invents the modern American style of realism in portraiture with his portrait of this guy, Lapawinso, who was this Indian chief in Delaware. All right. And again, in one of those stories that kind of gets overlooked in the tragedy of what happened to the native, if you can call them that, because again, were they truly native to this land or did they come over from the Bering Land Bridge? But what happened to the people who were here when the European colonists came over? One of the unfortunate elements of their story, much like the African slaves, is this guy sells so much of the native land in Delaware to the Penns and what becomes Pennsylvania. Right? But anyway, so this is Gustavus Hecilius. Right? He painted this portrait of this guy, and it's in a much more realistic style than what was common for the day in America. Other artists in Europe were getting slightly more realistic, but in America there was still this sort of generalized concept around portrait painting. And, I'll get into that in the museum episode proper, I think, probably. But anyway. But the interesting thing is who else sits for him, right? I mean, not only does he get this first commission for the Last Supper and for this crucifixion picture or whatever, the wealthiest families in the mid-Atlantic sit for portraits from this guy. And this is what sort of triggered this episode, right? Because one of the portraits is of Mary Darnell Carroll, who is the wife of Charles the Settler. And I know that because this footnote tells me Mrs. Charles Carroll the Settler. Right? That's this Mrs. Charles Carroll, right? Mary Darnell Carroll. Where I brought him up, all right? All right, Charles Carroll the Settler, Rage Cage's body double. Right? So, and a very important part, a very key cog in the Mud City story, right? He's very connected. It's through the Carroll family that so much of the Mud City fake history, or at least, the Mud City fake history of America storyline runs through. I don't think you get close to this guy and paint his wife, regardless of how good a portrait painter you are, without serious connections. And so, I wanted to find out, this Hecilius family line, could they be related to, how noble is their blood, I guess, is the way I was looking at it. And so, they do tell me who his father was. All right, this Andreas Oli Hecilius. So I went looking on Genie to see how far I could bring it back. And so here we go with Gustavus, right? And we're just going to click back on the paternal line. Here's his father, Andreas. Andreas's father, Olaf Bengtsson. Olaf Bengtsson. And his father was just Bengt, right? And that's it. That's as far back as it goes. All right, so I decided to ask Googly, is Bent Swedish nobility? And there are several prominent figures, mostly Bent Algotsson, a medieval favorite of the king who was made a duke. This Bent Bengston Oxenstierna, a famous traveler and statesman, Bengt Gabrielsson Oxenstierna, a 17th century foreign minister who secured Sweden's neutrality. So again, I can't chase all of this down, but there are signs that point to the Hecilius family, perhaps coming from these noble Bengts. I don't even know how to say it. Bengt. And so again, this is just open speculation. There's really not much to it. So the payoff, the cherry for this, I'm looking at his portraits, and I want to take a closer look at the portrait of Mary Darnell Carroll, because I featured it before very early in my show. And so I clicked on it, and it brought me to this portrait. And this is the portrait by Charles Willson Peale. What? Hey, wait a minute. You have Gustavus's portrait here. Why does the link below it go to Charles Willson Peale's portrait? Right? Is it because this portrait is it's a damn sight more attractive than Gustav's? Where's I brought it up. Here is Gustav's, a portrait of Mary Darnell Peale. That is quite the 5 o'clock shadow on Darnell here. Right? And I don't know, maybe if you were to ask me, this dress is a little loose around the bust. Then maybe Darnell with the 5 o'clock shadow is a little flat-chested. I don't know. And that when you look at Charles Willson Peale's portrait, she's just a little bit more attractive, right? And to put them side by side, Charles Willson Peale definitely gives Darnell a softer, more feminine look compared to Gustavus. But they do look similar enough to suggest that, it's the same model, just different artists, different time periods, right? But what's that? The portrait of Mary Darnell Carroll of Charles Willson Peale that was linked from the Gustav Hecilius page? This is not the wife of Charles Carroll the Settler, but of his grandson, Charles Carroll of Carrollton? I scroll her up. Scroll her all the way to the top. And she's married to Charles Carroll of Carrollton. What? And so now, again, going back to the side by side. And so again, while I obviously can't say that this is an exact match or that they're the same person now, It certainly is a coincidence that the grandson marries somebody who bears a passing resemblance to his grandmother, and that they have the same family name, and again, can't get into the Darnells and all of that now. But when you're looking at portrait artists like the Heciliuses, and more to the point, Charles Wilson Peele, as I'm going to get to eventually, and you're looking for signs that the story of late colonial period America and the American Revolution may not be what we're sold by the paintings and portraits of these people. Coming across a story like this where one picture is linked to the other, though not the same person at all, yet they kind of look like the same person, these things, finding these instances, do nothing but add fuel to that speculation. And so there's going to be a lot more to come with this, right? Like I said, still a long way off on it. But until then, remember, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? So until then, cheers.
That just happened.
All right, so that's what I have for this one, guys. Like I said, I'll be pulling this episode soon because I do want to work this material back in. I kind of just wanted to let people know that I am still working on this and that there will be new episodes in 2026, right? Cheers, guys.